Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. My name is Priya Agarwal, and I am the Chief Marketing Officer here at Paper. For those of you that might not be familiar with the company, we're an educational support system providing students with 24/7 live help and essay review, and teachers with real-time feedback to personalize their curriculum. Paper partners with school districts across North America to close the achievement gap and support educational equity. As part of the Restart and Reimagine discussion series, we're really excited to bring together district leaders from across the nation to share their insights on current challenges and future opportunities in K-12 education. Today's panel will be discussing how to institute long-lasting change by putting words into actions that will move the needle in our fight for equitable education. For this conversation, we're excited to bring together Dr. Susan Enfield, Superintendent at Highland Public Schools in Washington. Hi, Susan. Marlon Stiles, Superintendent at Middletown City Schools in Ohio. Hi, Marlon. And Dr. Christy Wilson, AASA President and Superintendent at Buckeye Elementary School District in Arizona. Hi, Christy. The discussion will be moderated by Tony Wan, who is the Managing Editor at EdSurge. Hi, Tony. Before I hand over to Tony to kick off the discussion, a few logistics for today. All attendees are in listen-only mode. However, we do encourage you to submit your thoughts and questions via the chat feature in Zoom. Also, at the end of the discussion, we will be launching a new campaign in K-12 education, so please do stay tuned to hear more. And without further delay, please welcome Tony and the panelists for today. Tony, over to you.
Great, thank you, Priya. And thank you everybody for joining us today. My name is Tony Wan, and I am the Managing Editor at EdSurge. We are a news outlet that covers the people, ideas, and tools that shape the future of learning. And given the news over this past weekend, follow us, as there will be a lot of news about what's coming ahead in education, in the days, weeks, and months to come. So over the spring, the pandemic has forced teachers, administrators, and education leaders to do things that they may have never done before or never thought was even possible in an effort to serve students and communities during the school closures. Now, a lot of this was to keep instruction going, to keep some semblance of schooling and learning happening. We've also seen efforts where schools and districts provided food, health, and other resources that attended to the well-being of students and families beyond just the academics. But most of all, the pandemic has really thrown a spotlight on some of the inequities that we know have been part of our communities into starker relief. Now, while we are all yearning for a return to normalcy in a general sense, I think it's become clear that not everything should go back to normal after the pandemic. It's my hope, at least as Managing Editor of EdSurge, that schools and districts will be more prepared and be caught less off guard when it comes to supporting students and families with remote instruction, should it be necessary again in the future, for instance. So how do we make sure that these efforts to improve education for everyone continue past the pandemic? And what does it take to make these changes permanent so that they're not just a stopgap emergency measure? And what leadership is required to make this happen? I'm honored to be joined by three of the top education leaders from across the country, and I'd like to open our conversation with a question about their thoughts about what shouldn't go back to normal. So just going alphabetically, I'm going to start off with Dr. Susan Enfield. She's the Superintendent of Highland Public Schools in Washington. Susan, when schools reopen, what shouldn't go back to normal? Or what's the one thing that your district has done that's going to stick past the pandemic?
Sure. So first of all, I would say that the one thing that has to change is that learning cannot be dependent on our children physically being in school. That this notion of remote learning, distance learning requires that every child have home broadband access. Now that's bigger than education. That's not something that Christy and Marlon and our colleagues can take on, but there needs to be a national solution for that, so that we can be prepared should we be in a position like this again. But more importantly, distance learning should not be seen as something that we're only needing to do in a crisis. We do have children for whom this is working, and they are deserving of having that option as part of their public education menu, so to speak. So that's the biggest thing. I think the second thing, relative to what we're doing in Highline, and I was reading a piece from the Christensen Institute a week or so ago, and one of the points they were making was that to really effect lasting change, we can't position what we want to see differently as a response to the pandemic. We need to actually frame it differently as this is what we know is the right thing to do for children, and we now have evidence that it's really important. So as an example, in Highline, we have a Highline promise to know every student by name, strength, and needs, so they graduate prepared for the future they choose. Because our children are not physically in buildings, we have worked with our staff to make sure that every child, every one of our 17,000 plus students, is connected one-on-one to an adult in their school who is checking in on them weekly. That simply has to continue once we go back. That this notion of kids over content, that we are actually making sure that our children and young adults are meaningfully connected to their school community through positive, respectful relationships with the adults who are working with them.
Thank you, Susan. Next up, we have Marlon Stiles. He's a superintendent of Middletown City Schools in Ohio. And I'll pose the same question to you, Marlon. When life goes back to normal in a general sense, what shouldn't go back to normal for school systems like yours?
Excited to be on the panel today. Susan, you got me fired up right off the bat. You spoke to equity right off the bat. So I'm going to keep the ball rolling on that conversation. I'm going to say one thing that needs to change, or we cannot go back to, is we can't keep the hesitation type mindset that exists in K-12 education in this country. The hesitation mindset is the one where we hesitate to tackle the conversation around equity and address the systemic inequities our kids have been facing for years. We've got to get rid of that mindset, and we've got to adopt that mindset that it becomes an urgent matter, right? This is a crisis. This is an emergency. This is an urgent type situation where we have to take action. You know, in the past, prior to the pandemic, we found an excuse not to send devices home to kids. We found an excuse not to really entertain the idea of creating inclusive learning environments for students. We found an excuse as to why we need to hesitate to say, oh, we just need to close the achievement gap. I'm hoping that when we go back post-COVID, we quit talking about the achievement gap and we start addressing the systemic inequities for those that we're underserving, specifically, and I'll say it, our brown and our Black students in this country. We've got to do something about that. And what I'm hoping we do as a profession is we take action, and more importantly, have an urgent mindset and the courage to actually stop talking and start doing, and really providing for the have-nots in this country, specifically our school-age kids, K-12 in this country. I'm hoping here in Middletown, and we're already digging into it. We've started knocking some of those barriers down. We've adjusted some of our fiscal priorities to align with our academic priorities to create some environments where kids can be successful. But plain and simple, I know we're already in this mindset here in Middletown. I just hope it continues to stay contagious in our profession. We get more urgent about taking action so our kids win at the end of the game.
Great. Thank you, Marlon. And last but certainly not least, we have Dr. Christy Wilson. She is the superintendent of Buckeye Elementary School District in Arizona and also the president of the School Superintendents Association. Christy, the same opening question to you.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Marlon and Susan. I can't add much to this conversation. These two excellent thought leaders and partners of mine, they just opened with just fantastic words. The only thing I would add is for us to dig deep down inside and find the courage to lead. I think there's a lot of us out there that want to do this work, and oftentimes we get stuck. So to play off of what Marlon and Susan talked about, we're finding new ways to connect with each other. Our students are finding new ways to connect. Our communities are finding new ways to connect. Now we need to stop talking and get to work. So I think that's what this panel is all about, is finding the courage and the conviction to lead. And that's what we need to start doing.
Now, when we talk about, systemic change in education, which is a timeless and pretty common topic. One of the challenges that often is raised is about the system, the bureaucracy of the public education system. You're working with different stakeholders who may, have different responsibilities, perhaps different interests, rules, and whatnot. Has the collective response to the pandemic from your district given you hope that we can really break this this muscle memory that we sometimes think is very entrenched in our public education system?
I think absolutely. Right now, we have the opportunity to learn what we're experiencing. And I focused on progress over perfection. That's a phrase that I think is really important. Right now, we don't know all the answers, we're experiencing it. And I think what's really important is that we don't focus on accelerating into the future with this notion that we have all the answers. We have to step back and ask the questions. What are we learning? What's working in your individual communities, and not be afraid of what you might find out when you ask that question. I think Susan talked about making sure that our communities are more and more connected, making sure we advocate, or Marlon talked about advocating for resource equity, make sure that we're not afraid to step out of that old way of thinking and not go back. I think parents are going to demand that. Our schedules are going to must look differently. So you have to make sure that you have the courage to ask those questions. Make sure that you're not afraid to find out what those answers are. In our district right now, we're making sure that we're not afraid to ask the questions, and we're studying what is working right now so that we can be better prepared for teaching and learning in the future.
Christy, just one example there. I wanted to follow up. You said, we can't be afraid to ask the questions for fear that we're not going to like what the answer is. What's an example of one of those questions that you've asked or encountered in your district?
Well, it's just a simple question. You ask students, what is working well for you right now in remote learning? If you have if you're in a situation where students have access, or ask parents what's working well for you. And then, be okay with the fact that you might have to change your schedule. You have to be okay with flexibility and adaptability. So you have to just ask the simple question of what's working well in teaching and learning, and then be okay with what's not working well and change it.
Susan, sorry, I cut you off.
No, that's okay. I would agree 100% with Christy. We have to have the courage to ask the question. And then to build on what my friend Marlon said, we have to have the courage to act, right? Action, it's time for action, not excuses. And so, one of the things that gives me great hope, because you are right, Tony, I think the muscle memory of a bureaucracy like public education is strong, and the tendency will be to just get pulled back into that which we know or knew how to do. And so it is going to take courage to act and do things differently. But one of the things that I see coming out of this that has, I think, the potential for us to ensure that we don't snap back to where we were is this notion of people not being bound by title and traditional role. This notion that as the adults in a school system, we are going to step up collectively to do whatever it takes to educate our children, and do that in partnership with our families. And so I think there's power in that, in all of us saying, it doesn't matter what my title is, it matters that I'm here to serve kids, and that everyone in the system has a role to play. Everyone is equally valued and has the capacity to tangibly make a difference in the education and the lives of our children. I think there's tremendous hope and possibility and power there.
So I think it's our own fault in education, right? We originally said we struggle integrating technology into the classroom. We hung our hat on that as educators for years. But all of a sudden, when COVID showed up, all of a sudden, and again, it's our own fault, credit to us as educators, we're integrating technology like we've never done before. So the celebration of the day is the fact that post-COVID, some of the skill sets that educators have created or upskilled or started to develop, those skill sets are still going to be in the bag of tricks. So we should have an expectation of each other that those skill sets continue to shine. I think for me, the serious question is who are we not serving? And when we get back to have the courage to be brave enough to dig into some work that you may or may not be prepared for, and to start asking the serious questions and being honest about the responses and the results, that we're not serving our brown and black students. We're not serving students who live in poverty. We're not serving students at the top end of the spectrum and giving them access to the environments that they need. I'm hoping that since we were able to find some skills in areas that originally we were deficient, AKA now we're integrating technology, that we can develop some new skills and some new behaviors, practices, and policies that really start to address the inequities that our kids have been facing. I hope every student code of conduct across this country gets rid of disrespect, right?
Defiance.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's start talking about the what ifs and dealing into the serious questions. We've already shown and proved ourselves that no matter what the challenge or obstacle may be, we can answer the call. So I'm hoping that we find a way to dig in, lean in, and create some new behaviors.
One of the things that we have, to answer your question, Tony, that we've experienced, and I know Marlon and Susan, you have too, because we've talked about this, is our community has expanded. There's been a kind of a, I don't know if it's a renewed sense, but because of the COVID environment we find ourselves in, folks that have traditionally not taken on roles of teaching, perhaps we've had to, just the flexibility that everyone is more of a hands-on, hands on deck, all hands on deck approach. They, paraprofessionals, bus drivers, everyone that's taken on a non-teaching role, they have taken on sort of this, I don't want to overemphasize and call it a renewed sense, but they have taken an extra interest in teaching students, right? So, and I would liken it to small group instruction in the classroom, where individual students who would typically maybe not have gotten that individual support that we want them to get, have now being paid a little more attention to your point, Marlon, where before they just may have fallen through the cracks. Now, I am concerned that we have a lot of students who are not in school, so we have to pay that forward. We have to make sure that no matter what, to your point, Susan, every student, every name, every need. But my point being that every child and every adult should be connected with, and we shouldn't have to rely on technology for that. But whatever, this is what we're using it for, and the silver lining in all of it is that we have better connections, where our students and our parents are the whole system is better connected for a better result in student outcomes. So that, in a sense, is a good thing. And I just am not going to go back to the old ways of doing things where folks are not as connected.
And sorry, Tony, I know Tony wants to get a word in here, but I just want to build on what both Marlon and Christy said there, because, to Marlon's point, who have we not been serving is an important question to ask. And to Christy's point, we've got to ask those questions and hear the hard answers and the hard truths. Our colleague Lavelle Brown, who's superintendent in Ithaca, speaks quite honestly and passionately about the fact that he has spoken with some of their students of color who are just fine not coming back into school, right? School is not a welcoming place for them. They are not known and honored for who they are and where they come from. And that has to change. And so I think that our students will be giving us a mandate to do things differently and to address the systemic inequities that have persisted in our public schools.
Do you feel like some of the inequities that you are talking about now are things that you've always known about and that have just been, things that have been just made even more clear and urgent for you as leaders? Or were there new things that kind of emerged during this time?
But it's incumbent upon us to ask the questions. We have to be okay with asking the questions. And I can't tell you how many times I've butted up against somebody that says, well, be careful about asking that because you might not be okay with the answer. So that it starts with, folks like us being able to have open and frank conversations about the real issues, and then moving forward with action, to your point, and hopefully it's inspiring others to do this work.
I said the answer to the question is yes. These inequities have been present for years. And I'm not talking about a handful, I'm talking about years. We've just, for some reason in this country, chose to call it the achievement gap or the improvement process, so on and so forth. We refuse to call it what it is. And it took the murder of George Floyd for it to really start to surface and to start bringing some serious advocacy across this country in K-12 education, become more responsive to what the needs of our students are. So you're talking about cultural bias, you're talking about social bias, organizational bias, oppressive structures that are in place in our K-12 system that really hinder the capacity and the success potentially of our brown and black students. So we've got to do a better job looking at our curriculum to make sure to allow students to be their authentic selves, as Baron Davis says, who's one of our colleagues who's passionate about this topic. We have to look at our practices as it relates to discipline, to have a better understanding that discipline is just a response to the fact that we culturally don't understand our students as adults. So therefore we issue a consequence for the behavior that they have culturally chosen to display in our educational environments, where if we as adults sacrifice and swallow our pride and really pay attention to our own biases, our response to the behaviors that students are displaying in front of us is just their way of communicating with us, not showing us disrespect or any type of quote unquote behavior. I could go on and on this topic, but it's been staring us in the face. I am overly excited right now. We've got so many leaders and educators in this country right now who are advocating for change. I am pumped about the potential, especially once we kick off this campaign here shortly, the three of us along with Paper, the potential for action to start to be taken and students start experiencing more success as a result.
Well, you know, one of the things that I really see coming out of this that could be the game changer is, to Marlon's point, our public education system was not set up to serve all children, was never set up to do that. And so we have been asking a system that was set up to sort and select children by design to do the polar opposite, right? Which is to serve all children equitably. Now we have a chance to rebuild, reimagine this system in a way that does serve all children. We can actually, once and for all, deliver on equity through our actions and our policies and our practices and our belief systems in a way that we haven't done before. And that's what needs to, that's the revolution that needs to happen, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things you brought up that's part of that is to rethink kind of our responsibilities and roles beyond just what the job title or the job description says, as you point out, I think Susan, you shared that. But how do you actually do that? I think people tend to get fixed into, hey, this is my title, this is my job, I do this, I don't do that. What's it going to take, right? For everybody to kind of get on board with kind of just thinking, broadly beyond what the description says, to really fulfill this mission of serving kids, which is, I think, why everyone is working in this system in the first place to begin with.
You want to go first, Susan? Well, first of all, I think we got to stop sloganizing education. I think that gets to what we're talking about here, and less of this call to action business. And the real work comes with, to me, cooperation. And so, I started my piece of this about asking questions and bringing awareness to the issues. And you build your coalition with parents and teachers and community members. And it's going to look different in my community than it does in Marlon's and Susan's. But we've got it. I personally don't think the slogans around in education do us any good. It's kind of like chasing the silver bullet in curriculum, and folks think this is going to be the next greatest thing that's going to change everything and help all of the kids be successful. So that's why I focus on progress over perfection. And we talk about what are we learning right now amidst this pandemic? What's working for our students and our parents different? And to kind of parallel that with the whole equity pieces that Marlon talked about, that's been going on for years. You quit trying to sloganize all of this. That's not a word, it's made it up. But quit trying to, make this all a call to action and all this stuff, and just get down to the basics of what are we going to stop doing? What are we going to start doing? And what is working? It's kind of simple. So, what is working well in your communities? What's not working? And to Susan's point, start to change your policies, but you have to do that. You have to do that through your own communities and working with your coalition of supporters.
Great. Christy, just one follow-up. I'm just curious. When you say sloganize and slogan, do you have a pet peeve slogan that just really
Well, I
rattles you?
think we over sloganize education. I just personalize. I think that just hurts us more than it helps us. Personally. Yeah, I guess I do have a pet peeve with it.
Kirsty, I'm going to struggle to follow up because I don't have a slogan.
Good.
And I don't know if I'm sharp enough to talk about sloganize. What I will say is when I grew up, my family, we had that old saying that it takes a village. And if we're going to do this work for all the right reasons, which are our kids in this country, it's going to take a big, big village. So my hope is that we get away from the I's and we start talking about the we's. We as in partnering with our communities more than we ever have before. Got some staff members at Mayfield Elementary in our district right now who are reaching out in ways I've never seen before to connect with parents about how learning is taking place. I'm talking about weekly family conversations and meetings with the teacher about how learning is happening, right? So we's. I know back in the springtime and throughout the summer, we as educators across this country, we didn't wear our badges when we started distributing food at distribution sites during the pandemic. We just chose to rally together to make it happen. My hope, to speak selfishly, is that we go from the I's to the we's in this profession and see what possibilities start to surface and see what response we get from the kids. But if you're going to tackle this topic, we're going to have to partner with all aspects of life, no matter what they look like, who they represent, or where they're from. So when that community, it takes a village concept comes into play, let's just be comfortable sitting at the table with each other and we're doing it for the right reasons.
I love that notion, Marlon, of moving from I to we. And I think that's a far more powerful way to describe what I was describing, to move away from sort of traditional titles and silos and job descriptions. To your point, we have seen so many people, I'm just thinking, and I'm sure you have these examples too, of our bus drivers and bus monitors who, they're not transporting our children right now. Our children are still, learning in their homes. But they are serving and supporting our children by delivering meals and by delivering technology. And more importantly, by delivering smiles and connection. And I actually think that our staff who are stepping out of what they traditionally do are experiencing a sense of connection to students and families that is likely something they are going to want to continue as well. I mean, because that's why we do this work. And so I love this notion of moving from I to we. That's where we need to head.
And if you connect that to some of our comments that we've had in the conversation so far earlier, let's not go back to the traditional ways that we've quote unquote engaged stakeholders in education. Let's move forward with tackling some of the conversation with everybody sitting at the table. And to be honest, that's going to start with us as superintendents, rethinking our leadership practices and behaviors to incorporate and involve all types of individuals, regardless of position or title, to be at the table as we start exploring some of the ideas. So a key starting point in this whole conversation will be us as district leaders having the willingness to engage the village to come up with some solutions.
Great. And, I've been really, touched and even like amazed by, some of the examples that Susan pointed out about, school bus drivers or other school staff kind of going out of the way to really serve families and communities with what they need at this time. How are you gonna, this is a perfect example, right, of going above and beyond your calling to, serve your families in need. How do you make this stick?
Well, I'll start. I'll go back to sort of that, that article that I referenced about saying that if we frame this as we're doing this in response to the pandemic, it's not going to stick, right? But if we frame this as here's what we've always known that needed to change, and now we've actually seen that change in action, right? So in Highline, for example, we're trying to frame it as we've made this promise to know our children by name, strength, and need. We now need to deliver on that promise in a different way. So I think framing it as sort of almost like a value statement, right? That we have to initiate this seismic shift in our system, because we you know, in the words of Maya Angelou, once you know better, do better. Well, guess what? We know better now. And so just forever shame on us if we don't do better.
Yeah, to kind of play off that a little bit, our tagline in our district is a community passionate about student success. And so before the pandemic, we were always looking for opportunities for community members to volunteer in our schools. I mean, that's, you know, everybody does that, right? You know, bus tours and just all kinds of things. During the pandemic, obviously with COVID, you can't have people in your district for a variety of reasons. But now, like I told you earlier, we were talking about how the roles of everybody has changed, and we have a very complicated governor order that everybody, you have to provide childcare and daycare and learning opportunities. So everybody, I mean, we're strapped, right? Everybody, all hands on deck. So what we're learning right now is that so many people like bus drivers and paraprofessionals and people who typically don't teach kids. I mean, they're not certified to teach kids, but they love it, right? So to Tony's question, how are we going to make sure in their job description, or how can we rearrange their schedules post COVID so they have more opportunities to be with kids? So our HR department and folks in our district are trying to figure this out. How can we make, because ultimately it's better for kids too, right? They're more passionate. They like their jobs. They're happier employees. They're not going to leave our district, and they're making really good connections with kids. So somehow, again, we got to figure this out. It's just a win-win all the way around. So yeah, I don't have the answers to that yet. Again, progress over perfection, but I will have the answers. We're going to make sure that it continues.
And as we are, thinking about, pushing to break outside traditional norms and roles, what has to happen in terms of providing the right kinds of supports and professional development for your teachers, your educators, your staff, in order to, make sure that they have what they need in order to, affect the changes that we're talking about?
Thing, if we're talking about taking action, right? Kind of the title of what this is about, walking the talk. We've got to go back and revisit our core values. And Susan mentioned something really struck a chord with me, and that's we know better, which means you've learned something. So if you've learned something, you got to do different. It's basically what she was getting at. So in all aspects of the system and how the system operates, we've got to do different now. And professional development is an exact is a perfect example of why we need to do things differently. So whether your behaviors are designed for professional development pre-COVID, right, discovery of the systemic inequities, whether your PD format was effective or not, we've learned something new. So we've got to reimagine what PD looks like. We've got to get to expecting out of ourselves as educators what we expect out of our students. And that's to show growth, that's to improve. That's to accept the responsibility that we've got to show mastery of some strategies that are responsive to what the kids need. We've got to do different when it comes to addressing the topic of becoming an anti-racist profession, of really tackling the idea of how do we handle bias inside of our school buildings. We've got to reimagine our PD topics and then reimagine how we go about developing some new behaviors now that we know better. And I'm not saying just book studies. I'm not saying guest speakers, although great guest speakers are phenomenal. I'm talking about true PD experiences that will change behavior that results in students doing better in the classroom.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that, Marlon. And I would add that we also need to help facilitate our teachers to own their professional learning, right? I think, at least in Highline, perhaps I'm sure many of my colleagues better than I have figured this out, but I don't think we always get it right between the district saying, we need you to learn how to do this, and teachers saying, here's what I need and want to be learning in order to better serve my kids. And I think that we're figuring out how to do that better. So how can we really hear from our teachers identifying what their needs are for learning and shifting our system? And that's going to push us at central office, because we got a plan for everything. And if you're really going to listen to your people who are on the ground doing the work, you're going to have to adjust those plans. And so that's going to, I think, force a nimbleness on the part of central office people that is a fair and appropriate expectation that we should be doing. So we're going to have to get better at that.
Yeah, the only thing I would add, and I keep saying this, we don't know right now. We're in the middle of figuring it out, right? That progress. So as long as we're committed to continuing to ask questions about what is working, and you have a few of those metrics defined, you have some teams in place that can really honor the work. And what I mean by that is you're really committed to your teachers. We're doing some things in education right now that probably would have taken 100 years to get going and stand up. So, we're committed to, really asking those questions. But the other thing that I think is equally as important, the system in itself is like overtaxed. I mean, overtaxed, right? So I'm just going to tell you personally, I have made a huge commitment to my staff to just make sure that they're taking care of themselves, because we're all perfectionists in our own way, right? So it's just like this wellness and balance piece is really important for educators, like to not like just overtax themselves with trying to figure this out, because nobody has the answers. So personally, I've just said to them, hey, you do not have to figure this out on your own. We're in this together. It's everybody's first year. And I think it's really, really important to, because they're taking this on like I've never seen before. And so I make a very, very, just a concerted effort. Every meeting I start, I remind people that, just don't like take it so personal, and they're educators. Of course they're going to. I do a lot of gratitude work with our folks. And I just think that I've never done that before. I mean, I've done it a little bit, but not like every meeting and close every meeting and make sure that they're really not taking it on like they do. That's really important to folks.
Yeah,
This is really forcing us to up our SEL game as leaders, and really not just model good social emotional learning and self-care practices, but actively promote that. And I would argue expect it. Like, we need to almost make it an expectation of our folks, because they are going to go above and beyond. They are going to, just push themselves to the brink to serve our kids. And so I think that's another positive that's coming out of this, right? This notion of our the best of what we know about good social emotional learning around things like gratitude and an optimistic closure to a meeting and things like that, I think are just going to become so common now in a way that I hope will shift our cultures a little bit permanently.
Oh, that's great. I mean, one of the things
that our workouts in this morning, I'm just doing a quick check real fast. Everybody got their workout in this morning, going after work, right?
After work.
After work. No, but seriously, I have noticed a huge change in the people that I am surrounded by and work with. That it's just so important, so necessary.
As we talk about what needs to change, I don't want to, and I don't think for you, it's this is not like a hidden fact, but I want to see how you reconcile that with some of the fiscal realities that may be coming away with, forecasts of budget cuts, coming, later in the year or next year, or, in the foreseeable future. How does that factor in? Is that a constraint or a limitation into how much you think we can push or buck the system?
So I'll jump in here. This is really a two-part question for me. Number one, it's about resource equity. And that marries with the idea of fiscal priorities aligning to the academic priorities of the district. Credit to our treasurer here. He is absolutely unbelievable when it comes to making sure our fiscal priorities are in alignment. So what I would encourage folks to think about as you really start talking about taking action is revisit your district's priorities. If you don't have those, set some. If you do have them, revisit and possibly even reset. And repeat that same activity from a fiscal lens and really think about from a resource standpoint, what's the biggest priority to make sure students have access to the resources and opportunities they need to have access to environments they need so that they can be successful in their own individual way. And that's going to look different for a whole lot of students, which is perfectly fine. We push our system. But from this particular lens, for me, finances are finances in education. I do pray that one day we don't have to talk about this fiscal potential for reductions, but it's just a fact of life. But for me, it's really two parts, just revisiting priorities and making sure we've got fiscal alignment as well, and really holding ourselves accountable for resource equity across our system and our profession.
I'd do you one better on that one, Marlon. I think as a superintendent, if you are, if you don't have those resource priorities in place, I think you as a superintendent probably should do some, just some reflection on why you're leading, what you stand for. Because we both, or all three of us know, you have to work with your governing board. And so you as a leader, it goes to finding that courage and conviction to what are you doing in this work? Why are you, and so I would just encourage any superintendent out there, if you don't have any of those priorities, then what are you doing as a leader? And do some self-reflection on that.
I agree with being mission, as leaders and stewards of public dollars, we have always had to be mission driven in our budget priorities and how we allocate resources. And that need will be even greater now. And we need to be very, very clear that we need another stimulus package, that, the challenges that we are going to face in this comeback will be significant. And, I'll give an example. We are looking at some budget reductions because of some state funding formulas here that will have some really, detrimental impacts on our system. At the same time, we know that a virtual learning environment is working for some of our students. And so we want to make that a permanent option for kids in Highline so that you don't have to leave Highline and your Highline community to go to a virtual school. You can do that in Highline. We want to launch that next year. It's the responsible thing to do, right? Once you know better, do better. Well, that's going to cost money for us to launch that next year. So we need to be real that for us to make some of the changes that need to be made, just shifting and reallocating resources isn't going to cut it. There will be a need for an infusion of dollars into our education system for us to recover from this, and more importantly, to help our children who need it most recover from this well.
Right. Let's throw a couple examples out, Susan. You got me thinking of a couple districts that are doing exactly what you're talking about, sustaining some of the structures in place creatively for kids and what they need. So if you're not following Valverde School District in Southern California, Superintendent Mike McCormick, definitely someone to take a peek at about how they are financially supporting some of the resources and structures in place for kids, but also Dr. Hamilton and Dr. Jeff Gorman up in Mount Vernon in New York, also looking at this from an urban perspective, serving students with that lens of equity to make sure that those opportunities are in place. But exactly what Susan said, two great districts and two superintendents to take a peek at some of their work.
Great. Now, we know that a lot of conversations and even your community look to you as superintendents, as leaders to affect some of this change. I do want to wrap up with, something that's kind of tied more to current events, with the news of the past weekend. It looks like, we may have a new administration coming in. What do you, as superintendents and leaders of your districts and community, what would you like to see or expect from our education leaders on a state or a national level to help push through some of the changes that we've been talking about?
So I'm going to jump in on this one because I thought it was just fantastic. I know Susan saw this because we were talking. I don't know, whatever night it was. I lose all track of time. But I did notice in our president-elect's acceptance speech that one of the first constituents that he acknowledged, in fact, it was the first constituent, was educators. And so, and I tweeted out something, the fact that it was just extremely refreshing to see that. And, you know, obviously that was a choice, and his wife being an educator, I'm sure had something to do with that. But to your point, Tony, I think all of us could agree that we're looking for some advocacy and support from the office of the president and obviously through the secretary. But to me, and I'm sure I speak for thousands and thousands of people out there, I mean, that was just fantastic to have somebody mention educators right out of the chute. So looking so forward to seeing policy and just a drive for support. And we'll have to see what the administration comes forward with, but and trickling down to the state and local level as well, with policy and support and advocacy for students and equity.
I would agree with that. And I think I have a short-term hope, and then of course, many longer-term hopes for what a new administration and a new Secretary of Education will do. And my first short-term hope is that we finally get some federal guidance on how to reopen our schools in a safe and consistent manner. You know, leaving these decisions up to individual school districts is just unconscionable. And the abdication of leadership at the federal and the state level over the last several months has been stunning. And I don't mean stunning in a good way. And so I think that what we're really looking for is leadership. And what leadership is really about is about service. It's about making a difference. It's about putting service and serving others above yourself. And my longer term hope is that our children once again see leaders at the highest level of power who model service above self.
It's gonna be tough to follow up those two right there. I mean, drop the mic on exactly what both Christy and Susan have said. I feel very passionate about those same things. If I could add anything, it would be this. We know we've got students of all walks of life who walk into schools and they do without. They're part of the have-nots. My hope is that the new administration really focuses in on making sure those students who are part of the have-nots have everything they need to be successful in life. We started a campaign back in the late spring called #ConnectKidsNow. And I won't go through a lot of stats or what it's all about, but in a very 5-second spiel, it's making sure every kid, when they go home, they don't have to face the homework gap that exists in this country. That campaign, we need to start celebrating the fact we don't have to campaign for that anymore. Every kid's got the resources they need when they go home to continue their learning. I also hope for this administration that we no longer have to talk about the achievement gap, and we can just start celebrating the fact that our brown and black students across this country are academically performing where they are able to perform, and the system is not systemically oppressing or holding them back. And then last but not least, I just hope that education, especially K-12 public education, gets the respect that it deserves, because our educators in this country are knocking it out of the park and continue to rise to the occasion every single time and answer the call. Our educators are doing it, and I just want to celebrate them. I'm looking for that moment here coming up soon.
Marlon for the mic drop. Well said, friend.
All right. Well, Marlon, that's the last word. Marlon, Christy, and Susan, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts about how you're overcoming the challenges in this pandemic, and how we need to make sure that the challenges that we face are not just framed as a pandemic response. And that was one of the most salient takeaways I got from this conversation. Now, before we leave, I want to kick it back to Priya, because I understand there is more that you have to share about steps that you're all taking to help drive education forward. So Priya, I want to hand it back to you.
Thank you so much, Tony, Susan, Marlon, and Christy. It's just such an incredibly insightful and lively discussion. And for all of you that were participating in the chat, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and sort of responding along and almost being part of the discussion today. We really appreciate the engagement. I have to share, like from the first day I met each of you, I think Susan, you sort of started it all when I called you and said, hey, do you want to do this panel with us? And who else can we bring on? And I was so inspired by all of your passion to drive change and just all the leadership that you showed in putting actions into words. And so I'm really excited to partner with you and with Paper to launch a K-12 revolution, really targeted to sort of bring attention to and celebrate the actions that will help us create schools that are truly worthy of our kids. I can't do justice to what this campaign is about alone. So I just want each of you to maybe take 30 seconds, 45 seconds, and just talk about what this campaign means to you and what outcomes you're hoping to accomplish with it. And Susan, maybe we'll start with you for this
Yeah,
one.
thank you, Priya. And really grateful, Priya, to you and Ava and Paper for really launching this. I don't think we knew that we were going to try to start a movement, but we're starting a movement. And I'm just so proud to be in a profession with people like Christy and Marlon who share this commitment to making something out of this moment. And so this notion of a K-12 revolution, I think that the three of us have made a solid case over the last 45 minutes or so that there is a need for that right now. And I'm very energized and look forward to us mobilizing our colleagues in the weeks and months ahead to really make that revolution a reality.
Thank you. Christy?
Well, I just want to say I love these people. They're just great leaders, great friends, and like Susan just said, this is the way it starts, right? And we've had a couple of conversations prior to this, and I continue to be inspired. And it just, I think for me, this whole thing starts with like-minded individuals coming together and talking a little bit, but it's more about action. Marlon reminded me of that too. Stop the talking, but at least if you have a network and you can kind of, get your juices flowing a little bit. Hopefully, my hope is that it inspires others to do more. And even if you're a little, unsure or you're not quite comfortable, you have friends out there, and you know that you can start this. And that's the whole point, is to be inspirational to others, and more importantly to our children. So I'm just excited to be a part of it. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And Marlon?
Yeah, again, just glad and blessed to be part of the group. I know we've had a couple conversations. I leave pumped up every single time. This K-12 revolution campaign to me really is very simple. It's what if we found the courage as adults to just go for it and actually find a way to take action versus talking about it. What would it do for our kids? What better position would they be in as a result of us finding the courage to do it? As a Black male superintendent, I often get questions about, well, if you dig into this conversation, that's only because you're Black. But also hear white superintendents and other white educators talk about, well, if I dig into this, I'm not prepared, or I don't know what may happen because I'm not Black. Let's get over that what if, and let's start talking about the what if we found the courage as adults to do it for our kids. I'm excited for the K-12 revolution. Let's make it happen.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing your words. I just tried to share my screen, which I'm not sure if I did successfully, so I'm going to try that again. So if you want to learn more about this, join us in this movement, in this revolution. You can go to k12revolution.org, where we talk a little bit about what this is and how you can participate. And then just follow the hashtag at hashtag K12revolution on Twitter predominantly, though we'll probably share it on other platforms as well. But in the coming sort of days and weeks and months, we hope to really have district leaders and educators from across the nation share their stories and share their examples of how they are actioning against their words and really making a change here. With that, thank you so much to everybody that was able to join us. We would love some feedback on the event today, and as well as your participation in the revolution. And we hope that you will take a moment to join us on November 18th for our next Restart and Reimagine discussion. We've got another a great set of district leaders coming your way, talking about scaling blended learning beyond the current emergency context. And we're very excited. And with that, thank you so much to everyone that joined us today, and enjoy the rest of your day.